Hey, so thanks for listening. My name's Nick Cosentino, and I have with me Graeme Harvey here. We're both engineering managers, and we work in software engineering. And we kind of wanted to start doing this podcast so that we could talk about some of our journey. We can talk about software engineering principles that are applicable to a lot of probably you listeners. And then I think as this evolves over time, we'll have a lot of different topics, probably covering software engineering, engineering management, career progression, and things like that. Today is probably going to focus mostly on our journey. So, Graham, if you want to say hi and introduce yourself.
Yeah, for sure. As Nick said, my name's Graham. I'm an engineering manager as well. And yeah, totally stoked to do this. I mean, I think Nick and I just do this together
Yeah.
anyways. So it's kind of nice to maybe, share it a little more widely.
Yeah, and we talked about kind of doing something like this, and I think it was kind of funny because when I mentioned it to you, Graham, I think one of the things you said to me was like, "Yeah, it'd be really cool to just have like candid conversations, get them recorded on topics that are, of value." And I hadn't told you this yet, but I was like, I really want to do something with Graham where it's like just a casual conversation and we can have it recorded. So that was already just kind of a good feel. So I'm also pretty excited for this. So yeah, I'm glad that we're taking the time to actually do this now.
Nice.
Yeah, so I think for today we were talking about we wanted to share kind of like our journey into becoming software engineering managers because our journeys, while they cross paths, are actually quite different in some of the steps that kind of took to get us there. So I don't know. I hadn't really thought about who wants to maybe go first on this or not. I'm already kind of blabbing, so I don't know. Graham, do you want to jump in or do you want me to have at it?
I think you know what, it's kind of funny. Like I think I kind of catch up to you and we cross paths like somewhere. So maybe if you start, then
Sure.
we'll kind of get those timelines aligned.
Yeah, and actually that's an interesting idea, right? If I get going, just kind of like as soon as our timelines cross, it would be cool to kind of hear how your journey is going, and we can go back and forth from there, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so yeah, my name's Nick. I went to the University of Waterloo for computer engineering, and I think for me, I was like, I'm gonna be into hardware. I hated it. So for me, it was basically I had internships that were software related, and I had a really good experience doing that. That reminded me the whole time I want to stay in software. The school part wasn't the most enjoyable for me, but as I got through it, constant reminder from internships like this is the place you want to be. Um, so it was a great experience to be able to go from university and kind of thanks to I think thanks to internships have this opportunity to get into a job like directly at a school. So I'm very thankful for that. And I wanted to go the route of startups. And I had internship experience that was primarily at startups. I took a job in Waterloo at a company. At the time, it was called JAD Software. It's now known as Magnet Forensics. Kind of giggling because it's kind of funny to say it was JAD Software. Graham knows. So I took that opportunity, and at the time, I think it was probably around 8 people. So like it's a startup. We're in. I don't know how you would explain it, like these separated office segments in an accelerator center, and we had 3 rooms that were kind of like the dividers were brought down. So it's startup life.
Shout out to anyone who's worked in an incubator or a startup accelerator.
Yeah. So it was truly like everything about it was like the startup experience. So really awesome though. It was really nice to just like out of school I was working with people that were also I think we had like probably someone who's been in the software industry for a little while, but it was a lot of like really junior people, and including myself, right? Like we had interns that were there when I started, but I was fresh out of school, right? I had internships, but hey, okay, I'm gonna start writing code. But I think what was interesting about my journey is that for me, the like a management opportunity kind of came almost out of necessity for the company. So as it's a startup, right? So as the teams are trying to scale out, it was like, well, the startup has an option to try hiring managers and figure things out. But I think for us, the natural thing right in the beginning was like, well, we have a couple people that probably could look at like at least maybe informally in the beginning, like just kind of corralling people and trying to like do some project management. It's so like Graham, you've worked in startups, but it's like it's such a flowy kind of just do what's got to get done situation. Like, um,
Yeah, the whole you just got to do what you got to do, and someone's got to make it work.
right.
Um, yeah, and it's funny because it is like you actually see this theme as you leave startups, but it's the most prevalent in startups, which is engineering management is actually really embodying of this. Like it's project management, right? Like you're doing sprints or you're doing waterfall, whatever you're doing, and you're kind of like leading that project. Maybe there's project managers around you. You're kind of like leading the product stuff. You probably work with a product counterpart, and you have to like participate in those. You've got like people reporting to you who are developers, sometimes testers, sometimes designers. So it's kind of just like make it build the thing and make it work.
Yeah, just make it happen,
So
right? So yeah, early on for me, it was kind of like this out of necessity thing. Like, hey, you've been with us like I don't know, like it's been a few months or whatever. Do you think that you could kind of help lead some of these people? And it was like for me, I like I'm like, well, I don't have no idea. Like I don't know what I'm doing. Like have I led things before? Sure. Like I've, on school projects and stuff, I was generally for if there was programming stuff in university, I'd pair up with people that were good at math. They would help me with the math, so I would lead on the software stuff. But I didn't know what I was doing, right? I've never had people report to me. But I had really good HR support, and shout out to Kelly Braden. Graham obviously knows Kelly. But yeah, I think having her there to just be like, I think that you can do this. I think you should give it a shot. I think you would be good at it. I think for me that.
did
Oh, go ahead.
did that? I'm just curious. Like, um, did the hey you're going to lead people part, was that like compelling, or was that the intimidating part of leadership, right? Like if you're kind of
Mm,
a if you're kind of like becoming a developer of notoriety in any way, like sometimes you want to be like that like architect, right? You want to be in charge of like technically leading a thing, but then there's like the management piece of you're also responsible for people, and I know people generally are either stoked on that or they're like pretty intimidated by it. I'm just like curious
yeah, yeah,
because
no, that's a really good question. I think at the time I was this is I think probably how I felt because to be honest I can't remember exactly, but reflecting on it, um, I think I was probably of the mindset like I'm pretty confident as a programmer. I feel that I'm not a cocky person, I don't think, but I feel like as a software developer, I'm a pretty good software developer. And I don't know how to lead people. I'm not saying that I can't do it, but I don't know how. So I think for me, it was probably more on the intimidating side where I was nervous because I'm like, if I'm going to dedicate time to this, am I going to be giving up something that people probably look at me and they're like, oh, like he's pretty good at that. And I'm going to lose that now and be like, oh, he's leading people. And sure. like,
that's it. That's really interesting. Like, we haven't got into too much of my history yet, but something you touched on, like I used to do a lot of conference talks
right.
on software quality talks, and one of the things when I moved to management was like people see me as someone who goes and speaks on software quality, and if I go to management, like I'm a noob. I don't know anything.
yeah.
And then someone was like, well, why don't you go to conferences and speak about management? And I was like, I don't, because I don't know anything about that. So I had a similar feeling, just in a slightly different way, which is like, am I going to lose this thing I'm an expert in and become a
Right.
dummy in something else?
Yeah,
So
that's really cool to hear that that's kind of the case. But yeah, I think as Graham will get in his story shortly, and kind of he'll get into where it deviates, especially from mine here. But yeah, kind of out of necessity for me, at Magnet Forensics, and really over time, I was there for about 8 years, and what I noticed over time, like in the beginning, a lot of it was like this back and forth of like, okay, like it would literally feel like this week I'm gonna be doing people stuff, and I would go all in, like trying to read about stuff, like how am I gonna get people engaged, and I was like super into it. And like to be honest, like reflecting on it, these people were they probably didn't need everything that I was trying to do. They're happy to just do the stuff they were doing. And then it would be like the next week I'm like, oh man, I haven't coded as much as I want. Like I have to totally go over here and code, and like then it would be like I don't really know if it was neglecting people, but in hindsight, I'm like I wasn't really focused on them, so I don't know. But it felt like
well,
a pendulum.
you probably had. like split responsibilities and split expectations. And if it wasn't clear, right,
Yeah,
like you're kind of accountable to a set of team members, but you're also accountable to delivering a product, it can be very like disorienting to be like, well, what's the thing that I'm supposed to be spending
for
my time
sure.
on?
And that's probably a really good call out too, because if like the more we talk about this in general, like probably for most people, if you're at more like established, like the company's kind of got some structure in place, it's probably going to be very different where it's like a clear expectation set out. Like, look, like these people are going to report to you. Like management kind of looks like this. You're going to have these things periodically. You might have reviews. You might there's probably going to be some structure in place. Maybe not everywhere, right? Because certainly there's going to be startups where this is more kind of a fluid thing. But that ambiguity in expectations, I think, was a huge driver in like what to do. I think if not that I would have expected this at a startup of our size at the time, but if someone came up to me and said, Nick, I fully expect that X% of your time is management things allocated to this, X% is, coding, and here's I if they made it cookie cutter and clear cut, I probably would have been less flip floppy, but I don't know. Like it's kind of unnatural to put it that way.
We know this thing, it's kind of a fact about people, right? Where we will like naturally, for the most part, naturally gravitate to the things that we are more comfortable with. And so it is kind of funny. There is a thing you see pretty frequently of people who are technically strong ICs or whatever we want to call them, and they kind of move into management. If there's any ambiguity, you see this kind of skew towards like, well, I know what I'm delivering if I go code,
Right.
right? Like I'm competent there. I know I will be judged positively on doing that. And so there is that risk without the clarity that people will just kind of float back into whatever is most comfortable for them.
Sure. Yeah.
Granted, you can be looking for a challenge, but generally speaking, in the face of ambiguity, it's more likely that you will seek that comfort maybe.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and at the same time, like what, so, you talked about the company being small and you becoming a leader out of necessity. So where did you like go for, um, did you have anybody to help you figure out how to be a manager, how to lead people, like fill the gaps on those skills that you didn't necessarily have because
Yeah.
you hadn't managed before?
Yeah, great question. I think at the time, like, I think so. Again, Kelly Braden was in HR at Magnet at the time, and I think I don't know, like in terms of like where I am in leadership in my career and stuff. I would attribute a lot of that to kind of Kelly coaching me through it. I know she would go out of her way to say like, hey, like you should totally look for a mentor. You should go do like she was always trying to build me up to make sure that if I had any doubts about this, then she would be there to kind of guide me back. So a lot of the time this would come up nonstop, where it was like, how do you feel about managing people versus the software stuff? Like, it was like no pressure, but have you made a decision about which one you like more? That's kind of how it would happen, right? And a lot of the time, I would say like, I honestly don't know because I'm not going to give up coding because I
Right.
truly enjoy that. Like I will go program after work because I enjoy doing it. And if I lose that, I don't know. Like that's a passion of mine. So giving that up is kind of scary. But at the same time, I'm like, I do want to keep investing into the leadership stuff. So I would say Kelly definitely was influential that way. I know she tried to set me up with a couple of different mentors and stuff in other startups and stuff in town. But nothing really stuck. Like not that that's like anyone's fault or like so I had a bad experience. Nothing like that.
Right.
I think it was more just like um, to be honest,
You were
like
probably busy.
that's really it, right? Like I was probably just like, hey, like it would be great to meet up, but like I'm probably just going to be coding at the startup after hours because I like to do it. So here we are. So yeah, I think
Yeah.
to answer your question, it was probably mostly Kelly, and then her inspiring me in those little stints where I would pivot really hard. I would try to go research, read, watch videos and stuff.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's funny you talk about the split time thing. I'm totally sharing anecdotes, and I guess we're gonna like memento my
Yeah,
history. Start from the wherever. But I guess we'll make some of them black and white, or I kind of forget how that movie went. Um, but yeah, there was a manager when I was at PlanGrid by the name of Liz, and she was pretty influential in a lot of what I know as some of my management skills and values today. But one of the things that stands out for me is when I became a manager. I in the office had my two big monitors, and at least half of, or maybe all of one of my monitors for months was I had my IDE open. Um, and I would like chip away at stuff, but it was always like the joke was it kind of was there and open, but I didn't really like use it a lot, and it was kind of
Right.
this like this comfort of like, oh, if I need to remember how to add value, I'll just go like, write some automated tests or whatever I could do. And she came over one time and was just like, she saw it on my screen and was like, Graham, like you're a manager now, man, like just close it, like say goodbye. Like it was just a very clear, like, you don't have time for that.
Uh, that's
I'm
good.
telling you. And it was really like, it was interesting. So the today, every once in a while, I realize that I have an IDE floating open for something, and it's like the back of my head is just like Liz, like just close it, man.
That's
It's not
awesome.
not, not your job.
That's
But
well, and that's an interesting point too, because we'll probably touch on this a little bit, right? But not your job, like there maybe not, right? And other places, depending on again if these expectations are set for you, it very much might be still your job. So it's all about where you
to-
are. So
totally, yeah, we should talk about that. And I mean, in this case, right, like the expectation of the managers, for the most part, was that they were spending their time. We often, we would say. There's some number. I actually don't remember what it is, and it probably varies depending on who you are and what your experiences are. But it was like, managing someone well takes, an individual can take potentially 20% of your time. So what, you have a team of five? Like, well, there's all your time. And if you have anybody who's kind of a low performer or they're struggling and need additional support, then that's more than 25%. I
right,
mean, I've had people reporting to me who can take up to 50% of my focused work time. Um, so the point there was like that the expectation is that you are leading the team, you're helping the people on the team. So even if you can contribute technically, that's secondary. And if
right.
you've got five people to be doing performance reviews with and one-on-ones with, and you've also got stuff that your team has to deliver and you're responsible for tracking your sprint progress, like that priority just falls away. But again, that was an expectation that was set. So
Right.
that's why she was able to tell me that joke, as opposed to like 50% of my time maybe should have been coding or whatever. But
Right. Yeah.
uh,
Yeah, Graham, I noticed you haven't put up many pull requests, so you better get on that. Um, yeah. So actually, I guess like my journey for where I meet up with Graham, I guess is right around now. So that beginning phase was kind of like very much a pendulum, and it kind of continued for a lot of my time at Magnet, right? So I mentioned 8 years. It probably continued most of the time, but it started to skew more towards, and I want to kind of preface this a little bit, like that role was still kind of being figured out. They started to hire on like dedicated managers and stuff that were just people managers. I was actually what they called a technical manager. So there was always for me a component of delivering software. So that was nice because I could say like, hey, I know this is part of my role. Um, but what started to happen was that I moved away more from coding every day to having more management related asks, but some of those things weren't just people either. And I think part of this was just the tenure at the company. Sometimes it was like, hey, you have knowledge in this historical thing. Like, can we bring you into a product conversation? So it's kind of like product management related. So it just became less time at a keyboard. But uh, I guess where our journeys cross is that Graham and I got to work together on teams at Magnet. So Graham, I guess if you want to kind of take over and share like how you got to there.
yeah, I'll do a quick catch up. So I mean, funny for me, like growing up in Waterloo, in the 90s, I guess, the like BlackBerry was there. They were a presence, and so like Waterloo was already established as a tech city. I was pretty like techie inclined as a kid. There's some pretty funny stories that I probably don't need to get too deep into. But one of my science experiments was like a ripped apart VCR, just like always digging into that kind of stuff. And it was hardware mostly, and I did some software in high school. Anyone who knew me in high school figured I was going to go into engineering, and for a variety of reasons, I didn't. And so I actually have a whole, schooling background experience in tons of things in science and psychology and business, which actually I attribute to some benefit of my management abilities now. But anyway, ultimately through maybe an early life crisis and a trip to New Zealand, I decided I wanted to get into clean technologies because that was kind of the future and there was going to be tons of clean tech jobs. We can debate if that's true or not, but ultimately steered me towards Conestoga College, actually. And in the end, when I kind of finally landed safely in a program that I was doing, it was electrical engineering. You know, still kind of in that hardware, science, techie engineering space. And I was at a career fair looking for a co-op job, and a manager from BlackBerry got chatting with me, Shelly, who actually we have crossed paths with at Magnet. She was hiring for a role as just a QA, specialist tester at BlackBerry, and I just had such a good conversation with her. I wasn't necessarily even sure what the role entailed. I had never
Mm,
really done software testing as a thing, but just kind of was like, yeah, I'll do this, and it gets me into BlackBerry, which has a name locally, or I guess it was RIM at the time. I don't even know. And
yeah.
yeah, so went and did that, and that really got me into to software testing, and I got really energized by this idea of being in software, but bringing in some of the other skills that aren't just programming. I think I knew pretty early, if I reflect on this, that I didn't actually go to programming because I didn't enjoy like typing on a keyboard for many hours, like writing
Mm,
programs, right? Like it was interesting because I love being in software, but I think there was just something very early on that I knew was like I can't just do this thing.
right.
And so like software testing brought this additional kind of problem solving element to it where it's like, oh, I never know exactly what I'm going to be working on. It's a little bit of this kind of like debugging, which has some crossover with electrical engineering, right? Like trying to figure out problems with circuits and all that. So anyway, it just clicked. So the only thing that I will say during my time there is it was like, I always felt like this is really great, but there's just something not quite right about this
Mm,
role. And
okay.
ultimately, I think it was being in software testing in a really large organization that maybe followed some older software testing principles, and the industry kind of evolved. And I think I just naturally had this draw to some of the more modern testing values. It's just what the way I was. So it's kind of like I like it here. I like what I'm doing, but I have some questions about the way this is done.
Right.
So
And I
someone
think
who I had crossed.
for anyone who's like listening or watching this, like I can't wait for more conversations that we have together just on like software testing. It's like, well, Graham will continue and we'll see.
Yeah, I'm sure we have many other opportunities to talk about some of this stuff, techniques on both sides of the development and testing
Right.
table. But yeah, so I mean, I followed a mentor or someone I had crossed paths with and enjoyed interacting with in software testing at BlackBerry, and they opened up an opportunity for me at Desire to Learn. So really learned a lot better testing practices and just kind of like growing my chops in software at Desire to Learn.
Right.
And then ultimately landed at Magnet Forensics. I would have actually probably joined Magnet a lot sooner because the first time I found out about being able to join, I had just taken this Desire to Learn job and was like, well, I can't move this quickly. That's not quite doesn't seem appropriate. So I reached back out a year later, and we kind of rekindled. It was with Kelly, obviously.
Right.
And then yeah, so I joined Magnet Forensics, and then was told I would be reporting to this dude, Nick Cosentino.
That's right.
So yeah, so literally from day one at Magnet, I think I maybe reported to one other. I think I reported to one other manager later in my tenure at Magnet, but for the most part, most of my 3.5-ish years there was actually working on teams with you.
Right. Yeah.
Um, so yeah, so I mean, I saw firsthand, what it's like to work on a team with someone who is kind of like technically contributing and leading and also being my kind of people manager or whatever you want to call it as well.
Right.
Um, so yeah, I mean, I guess just to like wrap up my journey to this point, or to that point in time at Magnet, that my time there is really when I started to recognize like, hey, there's some stuff elements from my past and my kind of like psychology schooling. I originally actually at one point wanted to be a teacher, so I did a bunch of stuff with
Cool.
that and with business, and all those things kind of came together to be like, I like working with people.
Right.
And I had this fantastic opportunity presented to me to get me into software and to help me grow in software. And I had a lot of individuals to thank for that, even to that point, and even more so to this day. And I was thinking there's a really good match here with kind of skills, interest, and an opportunity to help impart on others what was imparted on me, I guess.
Right.
So that's when I really started to think about how I would get myself into management. Um, Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I guess like to quickly conclude like where Graham and I like had parted ways until where I'm at now. Really the biggest shift I would say is like so after Magnet I came over to Microsoft. My role, like we were talking about expectations and roles, right? Because at that time it was very much like you're a technical manager at Magnet. You're expected to be coding. It's not like someone was counting my code reviews and pull requests and commits and stuff. But there's a coding element, and then there's going to be the people management part. Right at the tail end of Magnet, there, I kind of was taking on like a second team, so I was already kind of reaching that point where it's like if you've managed teams before, like having a second team and then trying to do anything technical on top of that, like something is giving. Like there's not enough, there's just not enough time in a day, even if you're working around the clock, to do it
Right.
properly. So that was a transition right at the end of Magnet, coming over to Microsoft, going through the interviews and stuff. They kind of say like they want their managers to be technical, and it's true, but the expectation is not that you're coding on the regular. So fortunately, I have the benefit of having C Sharp as my background for programming. There's a lot of C Sharp at Microsoft, and I can actually feel like I have some of that technical contribution piece without necessarily actually writing code. I can actually jump onto code reviews and kind of get that itch scratched where I'm like, oh, like I can actually talk about this and work with people on some of these things. So, um,
Right. We can totally talk about some of the avenues to stay technical if you want to be a manager.
yeah, yeah,
Um, do, there's two things here. So one, I was just going to mention, while you're talking about kind of splitting your time at Magnet and then ultimately the expectations at Microsoft. My measure for this, and it only works if you're in an agile environment.
mm,
But my measure is if you should be considered contributing to the team's velocity or not. So for me, like if I'm doing any technical tasks for my team, right, I wouldn't story them, bring them into our sprint and count them towards our sprint velocity because I don't want to be a detractor to the team and missing their commitments or skewing, their delivery capability.
right.
I think if you are a manager who's expected to be shipping code or delivering features and managing people, you probably are taking stories, contributing to that sprint velocity, and that's measured as part of the contributing team,
And
right?
that's
So that's what,
that's a
yeah,
really good point because like again at the tail end of Magnet there, I was at the point where I was like, yeah, I can take this, and it was like, but don't put it into the sprint because
right.
I just don't know. Like it should be an extra thing, and it was like that's a little weird, but like it worked. But it was kind of proving like exactly what you're saying, Graham, where it's like I'm getting to the point where I can't actually consistently contribute to a team.
And you probably wouldn't take, features or tickets for things that have a delivery date or have a deadline or an expectation because
Totally.
like, oh, I also have this other commitment around doing my one-on-ones and helping the people who potentially need my help in other ways.
Yeah,
So,
like literally, if anything like that came up, it legitimately meant that I'm going to be sacrificing time that is outside of work. I will have to find a way to make this up somehow because it's not going to be
right.
sustainable in work hours, and no one forced me into anything like that, but it's like there just isn't time to do that properly. So yeah, I think that's a really
So
good like check.
And just as an aside, because I'm generally curious, like so you said you hop on code reviews for your team, but your highest expectation is around the people management. Do you
Sure.
have code running in production anywhere? Like, have you contributed to something that is not just a code review?
I have at my time at Microsoft, I have so okay. In terms of production code, I have one thing that I committed during like a almost like a hackathon type of thing. I think it's probably already like I have people on my team that have probably stomped it already to make it better. So I probably had like the one or two commits in there, and I put tests in just so you know. Funny story on those tests actually because they didn't actually catch everything that they should have. And then the only other code I've written is actually for like dashboarding stuff. So my
Right.
contributions technically at Microsoft have been more about bringing out data. So trying to like we have data in different places, and how can we make sure that we're getting like insights from that data to steer some of what we're doing. So that wasn't like code reviewed, it was really just like hacked together stuff that
Yeah, I was just curious, trying to set a baseline for those who might be wondering, like, okay, like if you're contributing, like how much do you? And I think the answer, and I was curious to see if you're answer would contradict or support my theory. I think the answer is basically generally nothing that is actually like important to the core applications or software that the business is building and
Totally.
shipping.
Because even those things that I did touch, like my team, it's only because my team like didn't have time to go learn it, and I was like, I have to learn this stuff anyway because people are requesting this, like these insights from me, and our team doesn't have them built yet. So, my team has a lot of junior people on it, and I'm like, I have to ramp up too. I might as well learn this stuff, and they've since taken it over, made it way better. But yeah, like that's a huge, yeah, huge difference.
Yeah, I think in my 2 years at Circle CI, I think I had one production commit, and it was to add an emoji to a page to add some fun to it. So, like, I mean,
So you're just
or
the fun committer. That's
that's it. That's it. Yeah.
that's
High
awesome.
production value.
Yeah, that's cool.
Um, so yeah, I guess maybe I'll just round out my story. So it's obvious that I did actually get into management. I did ultimately move to a more startup. Well, I can't. More is not the right term. But I went down to San Francisco, took a job at a company called PlanGrid there. And what actually happened was I was an individual contributor, kind of building automation solutions for them. I had done something at Magnet that specifically that they wanted. They wanted this Windows automation test framework, and the one we used at Magnet was what had been on their radar. So not a lot of people have experience in it, which kind of got me in there. But that wasn't my end game per se.
Sure.
And so what's really interesting is while I was at PlanGrid, I really recognized the need for more people than kind of the scattered 3 or 4 people they had kind of focusing on different frameworks for our mobile platforms and for our Windows platform and for our web platform. And so I kind of proposed, hey, we should consolidate some of this. We really should have a team owning some of this. And we can get into the different like QA automation engineer
Sure.
models that orgs have and are successful or not. But ultimately, I did pitch, a team to do some of this. And the manager I had at the time was on board with my pitch, and then he kind of said to me, "So who's gonna manage it?" Maybe it was a nod to get me to step up. Maybe it wasn't. I'm not sure. But I did say like, well, I've always wanted to be in management, and I know this stuff really well, so I think there's a good fit there. So maybe me. And it was kind of like, I don't know. I would like to, but I don't. Is this how you get a management job? I'm not sure. And ultimately, he was willing to take a chance on me, went to bat for me, and did get me that position. And then that was, being in that position was confirming like this is where I want to be. Um, and
And
then getting
sorry,
to
Graham,
spend,
just to
yeah, yeah.
briefly cut you off there, but that's a fundamental difference between our journeys, right? Because for you it was like I'm gonna go out on this limb, I'm gonna ask for this, like I'm gonna carve my own path to get into management, and I mean for me it was more just like we need someone to do this, like there's no one else. Kind of sucks to say it, but I think I feel like ultimately I probably would have arrived where I'm at, but I think that was a difference in kind of how we got to on these paths.
I mean, that's a good point. And to PlanGrid's credit, they had career ladders in place, and one of the things that they were very clear about is we have this technical track and we have this management track, and the levels are kind of parallel. Like here's where they
Hmm.
line up, but they're not like this misnomer of like, well, once you've progressed technically to a certain level, you step into management, right? I think that's a little more of like an old school mentality about management.
I hope so,
Um,
personally. Yeah.
I hope it's considered old. I'm sure there's elements of it. The phrase I've used in past when talking about this is like when you have a culture or a process like that, really what you're setting yourself up for is losing good engineers and gaining crappy managers. That's really
That's
what it's
what
designed to
happens.
do.
Yeah.
Because there's no guarantees that people who are technically strong contributors want to lead people, and there's nothing to say that people who are really strong people leaders have to be technically strong. We can get into that
Sure.
at some
Yeah.
point as well. I think there's an element of you do need to be able to understand what's being talked about. You need to problem solve with your team. But I will be very clear with many of the teams I've worked with, past, present, and future, that like I'm not the technically strongest person in the room, right? And I'm not there to make technical decisions for the team. I'm there to take a bunch of input, help kind of slice and dice the information we have, lean on the experts in the right place, and empower the team to make the right decision.
Absolutely.
Um,
Yeah.
so it's kind of funny. So PlanGrid, they had their career tracks in place. Credit to them for that. In this case, there would be an expectation for a manager of what they need to do, which is great. It's like, hey, here's what you're going to do as a manager. But there probably would be this bar of like skills you need to demonstrate to be one. And I probably wasn't there long enough and given enough opportunity, not by anyone's fault, just by the time I was
Sure.
there probably wasn't enough opportunity for me to be able to demonstrate all of those skills. And so while
Mm.
the org had the right things in place, for me, it did still take somebody being willing to say, I've seen potential in you. I've seen you demonstrate capabilities in other things that I think will translate to management. But I didn't demonstrate that I would be an effective manager, on the job. Someone went on a limb and said, like, here's the expectations that will be placed on you, and I believe you can do it.
Right.
Um, so
And it's kind of interesting because I don't have like, decades and decades of experience in tech, but I suspect it's probably rare that someone enters tech like strictly from like I am a manager. Like I feel like I don't know if this is like statistically proven, but probably almost always like you're an IC doing something technical in some capacity, whether it's testing, whether it's contributing code, whether it's you're an IC role contributing something, I think, and then finding your way into management. Um, I'm sure there are people that had, I don't know, maybe at non-tech companies they moved into management and then transition over. Maybe that's more of a common like crossover path. But I think if you're in tech already, like you're probably an IC that finds their way into management. Is that kind of what your belief there?
yeah, I think that's about right. I certainly have seen people come from other industries and
Mm-hmm.
have demonstrated leadership skills in a way that should translate to management in software engineering, and I've seen that. But for the most part, yeah, people come up through some path and then ultimately land. I mean, I don't know many places that would hire a new grad as a manager,
Right.
even if you went to school for some sort of management thing. I mean, it's just I haven't seen that. So,
Right.
but interestingly, I have seen you know people like myself coming from QA backgrounds to move into
Mm-hmm.
managing full product SaaS teams or whatever. I've seen a good friend of mine was in product management. A couple of friends of mine were in product management and kind of made a leap over to engineering management.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing. It's like, yeah, they were never writing code to deliver the product, but they were contributing to product development in other aspects, right? By
Right.
being in the product group. And so the leadership skills don't come from being a strong technical contributor. They come from being a strong leader. And so they know enough. People I have worked with who have made that move, know enough technically to be able to participate in those conversations,
That's right.
understand what's being talked about, and guide the team to build the right thing,
Mm-hmm.
and lean on the people with the right expertise for what we need to do to get there. So that's going to be a recurring theme for me, probably in this and probably in my career as I talk to other people, which is, I don't want anyone to be deterred from management because they don't know if they are technically strong enough.
Right.
I think that would be rather unfortunate if someone didn't make that move because they were concerned that they needed to be the smartest person in the room to be able to be the manager. Granted, there is a variety of um, roles on the spectrum that
Yep.
different organizations expect,
Yep.
but there is opportunity for people out there, and I think that's a really important thing to highlight because I will be continually reminding people that I probably shouldn't be allowed to contribute too much code to production. Like I just don't write the best code, and that's why I'm not a developer. That's why I'm a manager.
Someone's got to
Um,
review it though, right? So it can't be that bad.
this is this is where I inject the quote. One of my favorite quotes. It actually came from. You can see it on my LinkedIn profile, but I stole it from the team principal of the Mercedes Formula One team,
Okay.
and it's in the Netflix series Drive to Survive, which everybody likes, whether you actually like Formula One or not. It's a fantastic series, but they show all the behind the scenes of the teams and everything that goes into racing. That's not just the driver driving the car on the track. So the team principal of Mercedes, Toto Wolff, he was saying in one of the episodes, yeah, I'm the team principal. I can't drive the car. I don't understand the best aerodynamic surfaces. I can't design those things, but I know who can, and I can help provide them, I'm probably going to butcher the quote, but whatever they need to be successful.
Right.
And I think that that was a really interesting take on leadership that I'm probably going to carry with me, from here on out.
I'm
So
definitely gonna have to watch that because that's yeah, no, that definitely resonates, right? Like it's so true. And I guess and you'll as you get through your journey in engineering management, like I think that's something you'll notice. It's not anymore about what can I do to like do the contribution, like where can I inject myself to like to make sure that I have my hands on things to carry out this commit or fix this feature or whatever. It's like you become more effective by letting the people who are very talented in those areas do their best work. Um, it's like as simple as that. But so Graham, I wanted to comment because the thing that you were talking about focusing on was like making sure that people know that they don't have to be technical. They don't have to be technical as like their foundational thing to get into management. And almost conversely, one of the things I talk about with people is in their careers, if they're like, I'm making progress, sometimes well, not sometimes, I feel like frequently comes up like, if I want to keep making progress, do I have to go this management route? And we talked about it a little bit earlier, but like, it's not like it's an old school way of doing things, and I guess in our opinion, right? But like if you're at an organization that kind of forces this career path where like technical, 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 and then oh, you've reached the top of the technical, now you go to management. Like it's kind of scary. So it's great to be at like at Microsoft, and I think Magnet was at least starting to structure this way because they had this in mind where like you should be able to keep leveling up as an individual contributor and just becoming more like you have like architect roles and things like that where you at that point yeah maybe you're spending less time actually coding at your desk but you're contributing so much like technical influence that like someone who's managing people just will not have time to do. So it's really cool to see these two spectrums, but I try to remind people like you have this path that you can stay very technical if you don't want to manage people.
there is a subtle thing in there that's interesting. I'm a big believer in this, and I totally subscribe, and I will bring this with me as a leader. But when I was at Circle, one of the things we talked about was in our ladder. Um, when you get to about, I think everyone's titles are slightly
Sure.
different, but I think in those tracks at senior engineer, right? You are a strong contributor. You can contribute to what we need you to do, write good code, influence good practices, whatever, for your team, potentially for teams that are in proximity to yours. But as soon as you want to move into staff, senior staff,
Hmm.
architect up there, the things that differentiate you to get up there aren't actually continuing to demonstrate stronger technical aptitude. They're actually starting to demonstrate that you can bring others up with you
Yeah.
and you can help collaborate across teams. So there's actually a people element to growing. Now, having said that, we would totally allow someone who says, listen, that's not really my thing. Like, I just want to bang out great code, right, and build great features, and I'm not really the strongest influencer or collaborator, and I don't particularly want to grow my skills there. Great. You can continue to grow as a senior engineer, and you'll continue to get pay raises, right, and we'll
Hmm.
continue to highlight your merits, and that is okay. There's no stigma around that. But to progress the ladder in terms of titles and
Right.
responsibilities given to you, it really starts to become about like working with other people. So I have actually coached some people who are starting to try and find their way around. Do I want to continue growing technically, or do I want to move into management? If you're a strong technical contributor and you are wondering, you can kind of work on the skills that will grow you into that kind of staff range, whatever they call it at whatever organization you're at.
Yeah.
And they're still setting you up for success as manager. And so as you start to take on more of those things and you become kind of a staff, if you're really enjoying the collaborating with other teams, right, starting to mentor some of the junior engineers, take on some of the stuff that isn't writing code, if you're liking that, okay, maybe you should explore the management track.
Right.
But if you're like, I really don't want to let go of writing code, I do like investing some of my time around this, then hell yeah, like grow up into the rest of the IC track. So
Yeah.
you can kind of like you can play the game a little bit and suss out some of the other tracks without making that leap. Um,
That's a really good
but
point.
and I think to follow that on, something I was introduced to early on that I think is true as well is it is perfectly acceptable to go be a manager, move into the management track,
Hmm.
and move back. And maybe move back and forth, like that is totally okay. And I would say for the most part, for people I would see as good managers, leaders, executives, right? They would be willing to recognize the merits of someone making moves like that and not necessarily look at that as like, oh, they must have failed as a manager, and so now they're back to IC. That it's totally okay. And I think that the only way you really actually know if you enjoy management, I mean, if you know you don't, you
Yeah.
don't. But if you're not sure and you think you might, like one of the best ways to do it is to try it. And you can hopefully have a manager that will introduce you to some of the things and let you take on some of that before you take the title. But maybe you get to the point where you want to take the title. It doesn't mean you're giving up code forever. And I just like it's really important that people know that because it's not this like one way door where you've stepped into management and now like
Yeah.
that's the end of it.
And
So
there's probably a bit of a stigma around it too, right? Because it kind of seems like that might be some sort of end state once you go, like you can't ever cross back. I mentioned to Graham before that there's a few people at Microsoft. I know one person in particular. I don't know their exact career progression, but certainly was IC up to manager at some point, moved into an architect position, so they're back to not managing people, and then back to being a manager. Like they've literally gone back and forth, and like this person, like from working with them, I know that they're a rock star. They're someone that's like known in our organization as being an excellent person to work with. So it's not like, oh, this person, yeah, they just couldn't be an architect or they were a bad manager and they had to switch. Like absolutely not. They were amazing at all of it. So really cool that they can naturally as they're like, because they're probably growing as a person, there's opportunities that are coming up and they're like, hey, this is a new technical area that might be awesome to work in, like I want to get my hands into that. Cool. Like, if you can, that's amazing. So
totally agreed. Um, so we've been chatting for a little while. I don't know, is there anything that we want to like pull out from these stories and kind of like, put out there, food for thought, advice, whatever, for anybody who maybe is intrigued by this or wants to
yeah, I think like
take something away.
I don't know if I I don't know if I fully like extracted my thought like coherently or not, and as I go to say it, maybe it's just going to be mumbo jumbo. But um, I do think that something I'd want to tell people is like um, it's a journey, right? So how that looks, like we just told you our journeys, like how mine looks and how it started off. Even though Graham and I crossed paths, like there's a lot of differences along the way. Like mine was my management kind of path was like out of necessity. Graham's was like he was carving out his path. So that could look very different for you depending on the organization you're at. But something else that we talked about too that I think is important is really like you're not forced to do any one of these paths. This is your career. It's something that's going to grow and evolve over time, right? So if you're interested in engineering management and you don't know yet if you want to do it, there's a lot of stuff you can work with your own manager on, try to get set up so you can feel some of these things out. It's not going to be overnight. And cool, like you can always try and move back and forth. There's nothing that says once you've done it, like you're stuck. Like that's just how it goes. So I think that's my takeaway is like it's a journey.
And I think building on that, I totally agree. And I think people get really maybe caught up in like past experiences of what
Mm-hmm.
they've seen, and so they think like it has to be that way. Or you read a job description and you're like, oh, it has to be that way. I think like there's a lot of flexibility, and engineering management is this interesting beast where like I'm not sure that engineering management expectations are the same at any two companies. They're slightly different, and there's a lot that goes into it. Really quick story. I spent a really short stint at a startup in Waterloo, and when I was hired as an engineering manager for our kind of consumer-facing web team, they said we're a small company, so we expect our engineering managers to contribute and contribute to development and shipping and all the things that go into building our product. And I think that was born out of necessity
Right.
for, hey, we're small and this is the people we've promoted into management so far have just done that because they all came from IC tracks and whatever. It just kind of was this like, that's the state that they were in and that's what they thought they needed. And I said, I'm willing to do that, but you're not getting the best code out of me, right? Like
Right.
no, like that's not my core skill. So like you're hiring a not fantastic developer, but you're also are getting me as a manager and all the things I bring as a manager. I ultimately saw a lot of opportunity there for me to 2x, 3x, 4x the team's productivity by doing what I do best as a manager and not writing code. So I mean, I don't necessarily advocate for this, but what I actually did was I just started spending more and more time doing those management things and basically not contributing code, and truly believing that I knew what value I could add as a manager, right?
Right.
Helping a team with strong leadership and kind of like working on getting to that high performance level. And at some point, the CTO came to me and was like, "Hey, the team is doing so good. Like, what are you doing?" And I kind of walked him through what I was doing, and I
I'm not
said that
coding.
to do this, right? Like, I would not have the time to code. And if you asked me to go back to contributing code, and if you started measuring my PRs,
Right.
like we wouldn't be where we are. I don't think the team would be able to function this way. And so if you want the team to be able to deliver this fast and at this level of quality, right, you need a manager like myself. And ultimately they said like, yep, like the evidence is there.
Right.
So we have changed our perspective. It is, yes, like keep doing what you're doing, please. And to take that further, right, all the best staff engineers, principal engineers, architects that I've ever worked with, if we measured their productivity and contribution to the team by the PRs they're writing, the number of lines of code or the commits they're committing, or even the number of features they've been involved in like coding for, and like that's the artifact we're looking for, they would get crappy scores, but they're fantastic at their role.
Right.
And so I think like what we realize is that someone's influence in leadership is difficult to measure. We should start to figure out what we can do to quantify and measure that so that we can figure out how to find that in other people.
Yeah.
But it's not just the how fast can I write code, right? How high of quality of stuff can I ship? It's also like what is my contribution to those around me, to the team? How can I bring everybody else along? And I think that to be successful in any kind of leadership, whether it's technical or people, that's really important.
Yeah, that's awesome, Graham. Like, I think that's the good story, and I think like unique perspective, and it's awesome that you could take that opportunity to actually demonstrate that to people that had. I'm not going to say like I don't know them. I'm not saying they were stubborn about it, but they had a way of thinking about it, and you were able to demonstrate over time. Like, look, like this is just a different way, and they kind of proved to them with literal evidence that it works. So that's awesome.
Yeah, now I'm not advocating go take a job that says we expect you to write code as a manager and
Sure.
then don't write code.
Because they
But
might they might
um,
they might actually go measure at me like, look, you're actually not doing this, and like you don't even get that opportunity
it, it,
to
it,
grow the team.
it's about reading the expectations, right? I was able to assess that team, the expectation for what they wanted out of that team was to deliver better and faster and with higher quality and just kind of hit that high performance bar. Excuse me. The best way for us to do that, I knew, was for me to make some changes as a leader and not to contribute code.
Stay
That
up
may not
late
always be
every
the
night
case.
and code, right? That's all you had to do is just code, 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 and not sleep.
Yeah, yeah.
Awesome. Well, no, thanks for that, Graham. Again, I think this is awesome. I like to be able to sit down and talk about this kind of stuff with you. So I am excited for more of these. We wrote a huge list of topics. I was actually I was kind of thinking we were going to start planning this out, be like, oh, it's going to be hard to come up with things. No, we got a lot of stuff that I think is going to be really cool to talk about. So pretty excited about that. Um,
Definitely excited to pull on some of those threads.
yeah, because once we start going, I think it's going to get pretty interesting. So yeah, I think again, thanks, Graham. I really appreciate this, and I think for people that tuned in to listen or watch, thanks for being here. Hopefully, you got some value out of this, and keep listening in the future as we put out more of these. So thank you.
100%.
Okay, take care.